Lou Reed famously said that one chord is fine, two chords are pushing it, and three chords you're into jazz. Welcome classic rock fans to my 5 favourite jazz albums. I'm often asked on this channel to talk about jazz, as it's assumed from the occasional wearing of a Miles Davis t-shirt that I'm somewhat of a connoisseur, which is just not true really. I would describe my knowledge of jazz as being fairly pedestrian. There was a thumbnail to this video, do I really hate jazz? Really one of those provocative thumbnails, a bit of clickbaitery for you. But the answer to that is no. However, the caveat being I don't really understand it either. And Louis Armstrong famously said, if you have to ask what jazz is, you'll never know. For me, jazz is a dark and impenetrable forest populated by men in sandals with goatees. If I can set a scene for you, I do sometimes like to put some jazz on, throw open a window and just nod along with a glass of wine as the odd itinerant moggy is spotlighted in the street lamps, just like a scene from a Tennessee Williams play. Truth is, I'm scratching my head trying to fathom what it is I'm actually listening to. And the other problem with jazz is I just find my mind wanders. Well, I must admit I am becoming a little bit of an expert on jazz because I did sit through La La Land the other night. And I must admit I agree with what he says in that film. This live experience, these musicians constantly jousting, and this music feels organic, ever-changing. Therefore it's something that's best experienced in a live setting. So what exactly is jazz? Truth be known, jazz is a bit of everything. Born out of marching bands, blues, New Orleans Creole. Jazz is Dixieland, swing fusion, jazz funk, jazz rock, R&B, bossa nova, bebop, hard bop, hip hop, cool jazz, hot jazz, free jazz and trad jazz, and Uncle Tom Cobley and all. So from my very limited perspective, a layman's perspective, these are my 5 favourite jazz albums. Number 5 is Nina Simone and Little Girl Blue from 1959.
He doesn't know it, but he needs me.
Nina Simone said jazz is a white term used to define black people. My music is black classical music. That's what she said, and this album is a perfect example of that. The full title is Little Girl Blue. Jazz has played in an exclusive side street club. This is her debut album, if I'm not mistaken, and it's her first classic album recorded over 14 hours in a single day in 1957. There was some delay to the actual release. This was the only album she made on the Bethlehem label, I believe. She was unhappy with that label for some reason. And this album, the reason why it appeals to so many jazz lightweights like myself is it contains all those songs that we already know. Songs like Love Me or Leave Me, I Loves You Porgy, My Baby Just Cares For Me. This album introduces Nina Simone as an artist of note, there's no doubt about that. And an exceptional vocalist, as well as a jazz pianist, I believe. I believe she tinkled the ivories as well. Number 4 is John Coltrane and A Love Supreme from 1964. This collection of songs highlights jazz at its most jazziest. Coltrane was a man that I was convinced a saxophone solo could actually last a few weeks, I think. My first introduction to John Coltrane was through the poetry of Philip Larkin, who was a big fan of Miserable Bastard, right up my street. He wrote that the only one compliment one can pay him was that one of stature. If he was boring, he was enormously boring, and if he was ugly, he was massively ugly. Philip Larkin was a huge jazz fan, yet conversely harboured some troubling views on race, shall we say. But he was also an alcoholic, so maybe alcoholism and jazz just go together so well. John Coltrane, I think, was involved with over like 50 recordings. Appeared on many albums by other musicians, including Thelonious Monk and Miles Davis. And towards the end of his life, his music seems to take on a spiritual dimension. I often wonder if he found God towards the end, perhaps. Number 3 is Charlie Parker and the Yardbird Suite. Now, Parker is considered the king of bop, if I'm not mistaken. Certainly the fastest saxophonist in the West. And this collection contains many of those classic numbers we already know. Things like Ornithology, Coco and Grooving High, as well as arguably his greatest ever recording, which was A Night in Tunisia. Parker was a driven man, but driven to self-destruction, it seems, and death from 34 from a heroin overdose is symptomatic of that, as well as being responsible for recording what can be considered some of the finest music of the 20th century. There's a wonderful quote attributed to him, and that is, if you play something that seems to be wrong, play it again, then play the same thing a third time. They'll think you meant it. Number 2 is the Dave Brubeck Quartet and Time Out from 1959. In the 1950s, his name was synonymous with jazz. To quote GQ, he became the biggest jazz star in America, a white pianist who conquered a middle America, just coming to terms with the expansionist popular extremes of suburbia. Many critics consider him to be a bit of a fake and represents a softening of the form. Kind of all puff and bluster, so to speak. I think Time magazine wrote that his audience enjoy being offered titles such as Blue Ronda a la Turk, because the implication is that they understand the blues, rondos and even Turks. Nevertheless, Take 5 is one of the most popular jazz albums of all time, and is well deserving of a place in your collection. Number 1 is Miles Davis, A Kind of Blue from 1959. My introduction to this album was via Richard Wright, who said he purloined a chord progression from this album for the Pink Floyd number Breathe. And I must admit it's a very digestible album. In fact, Steely Dan's Donald Fagen said this record is sexual wallpaper. Miles Davis, his soft muted trumpet, has become synonymous with cool jazz. And there's no better example of this, of his art, I suppose, than this album. Many see it as a kind of form of easy listening jazz, which seems a bit unfair. It's certainly one of his less challenging albums, I give them that. It's very much become the template of what a jazz album should be as far as I'm concerned, from its intro of that wistful piano and snaky bass, to the full-flight sophistication of flamenco sketches. It is the very personification of modern cool. Where jazz is these days, I just don't know. I mean, Frank Zappa said jazz isn't dead, it just smells funny. But my exploration of this music is merely that, an exploration, or someone who's interested. But nevertheless, I think my perspective is fairly pedestrian. A bit like soul music. I love classic American soul, but I haven't wandered too far out of those, beyond those parameters, to be honest with you. So I don't, a little bit out of my comfort zone, which is why there aren't a lot of videos on this sort of music on my channel. If you enjoyed this video, please help me out by smashing the like button. It makes a big difference to the YouTube algorithm. And leave a comment, and do all sorts of other things as well. Other than that, I hope you're having a very happy new year, and hope you're well, staying safe, and of course that you keep listening.